Lancaster stood by the kitchen sink, hands submerged in lukewarm dishwater, her back aching from the weight of her 8-month belly. The tap dripped rhythmically, 1, 2, 3, and she found herself matching her breaths to its rhythm. The house was quiet, eerily so. Thomas had left that morning without a word, only the slamming of the door to mark his exit. No kiss, no goodbye, just silence. She looked around their pristine kitchen, spotless from her morning cleaning spree, trying again to make herself feel useful. She had become a quiet prisoner in her own home. Her joy had been exchanged for politeness, her glow replaced by dullness. Pregnancy, which once made her hopeful, now felt like a burden she carried alone. She wiped her hands dry and walked slowly to the couch, lowering herself gently. There, she stared at the muted TV screen, not watching, just breathing. That evening, when Thomas returned, he barely glanced her way. She straightened up, smiling faintly. "Hey, babe, did you eat?" "I left your jollof in the oven," she said, hoping for any flicker of warmth. Thomas dropped his keys with a loud clink. "I'm not hungry," he muttered, brushing past her like she was part of the furniture. Emma's voice cracked slightly. "Did something happen at work?" He turned to her, face stony. "Emma, can we not? I already had a long day, and the last thing I want is to come home to your heavy breathing and snoring again. I barely slept last night." Her lips parted, stunned. I can't control that. It's the pregnancy." "Then do something about it," he snapped, disappearing into the guest room. Emma sank into the couch, her belly cradled in her hands. She blinked slowly, the sting behind her eyes tightening. Her throat burned, but she swallowed the lump down. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to be loved, to be seen. The next morning, Emma sat in the back seat of Thomas's car, dressed in a simple floral maternity gown, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching her hospital file. Thomas drove in silence, his sunglasses hiding any trace of emotion. The car ride was heavy with unsaid words. At the hospital, she waddled in alone while Thomas stayed outside making phone calls. When she returned an hour later with swollen feet and a strained smile, he didn't even ask how it went. "All okay?" she offered, climbing in beside him. "If it wasn't, you'd have called," he replied curtly, revving the engine. Emma pressed her lips together. She watched the scenery blur past the window, trees bending under the weight of the wind, just as she was bending under the weight of her life. "Thomas, do you ever think about when we used to dream about this baby?" she asked softly. He chuckled bitterly. "I dreamt of a peaceful life, not this." They were halfway home when Emma dozed off, head tilted to the side, lips parted as a soft snore escaped her. Thomas's eyes narrowed. His hands tightened on the wheel. And then screech. The car jerked to the side of a remote stretch of highway, sending Emma forward. She woke with a start, blinking in confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked, dazed. Thomas stepped out and slammed the door. "Get out!" he barked. She blinked again, thinking she misheard. "What?" "I said get out," he roared, pulling open her door and yanking her bag from the back seat. "I can't take this anymore. The noise, the dragging, the weight. I need space." She stared at him, mouth open. "Thomas, please don't. I'm 8 months. This isn't safe." "You should have thought of that before keeping me up every night," he growled, tossing her bag onto the grass. And then he was gone, engine roaring away, taillights disappearing into the curve of the road, leaving her standing alone. The wind picked up, and so did the fear in her chest. Emma's feet ached as she walked slowly along the edge of the highway, one hand clutching her side, the other shielding her eyes from the low sun. The ache in her lower back grew sharper, and her lips trembled not just from the cold air, but from the humiliation that tightened around her like a noose. Each car that passed without stopping felt like another rejection, another confirmation that she was truly alone. Her dress clung to her legs with sweat and dust, her swollen feet slipping slightly in the sandals. She whispered softly to her unborn child, "Hang in there, baby. Mama's trying." And just as she felt her knees about to give way, she heard tires slow behind her, then stop. A deep voice called out from a black SUV. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She turned slowly. The man stepping out wore a gray shirt, jeans, and had kind eyes that weren't trying to undress her, hurt her, or ignore her. "Can I help you?" he asked again. Emma opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She simply nodded, tears falling silently down her cheeks. The man offered her his jacket and gestured to the passenger side. "You don't have to say anything. Let's just get you somewhere safe." She hesitated for a moment, then got in. The seat was warm. The air smelled faintly of mint and leather. As he drove, he glanced at her gently and said, "Name's Henry. Henry Walker. I don't need your story unless you want to share. Just want to make sure you and that little one make it home." She stared at him, her voice cracking as she whispered, I don't have a home right now." Henry nodded. "Then let's find you a place to rest tonight. I know a few spots." They passed 3 shelters, all full. He didn't even hesitate when he said, "I've got a place out in the country. Quiet, safe, you can stay, no catch." Emma looked at him then, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel invisible. She felt noticed, not pitied, not judged, just seen. The drive to Henry's countryside home stretched across winding lanes and fading skies. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands resting on her belly while her mind struggled to keep up with the pace of the last few hours. She kept stealing glances at Henry. There was something oddly calming about him. He didn't talk much, didn't pry, and didn't fill the silence with awkward questions. When they reached the gravel path that led to a small, 2-bedroom bungalow nestled between tall eucalyptus trees, Emma's breath caught slightly. The house was modest but clean, with a wooden porch, an old rocking chair, and wind chimes that whispered gently with the breeze. Henry stepped out and opened her door. "It's not much, but it's safe," he said, unlocking the front door. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and old wood. A small living room welcomed them with warm lighting, a soft couch, and stacked books lining the walls. Emma ran her hand along the doorframe as she stepped in, grounding herself in the unfamiliar kindness. Henry showed her to the guest room, which had a neatly made bed and a window that opened to rows of lemon trees. He left her to settle in, saying only, "Rest. We'll figure things out in the morning." That night, Emma lay on her side, staring at the ceiling fan, tears quietly slipping onto the pillow. But they weren't just tears of pain anymore. They were the kind of tears that came when the body finally unclenched. In the middle of the night, she stepped into the kitchen for water and found Henry seated at the table, nursing a cup of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without turning. She hesitated. "No, just thinking." He gestured to the kettle. "There's chamomile if you want. Helps calm the body, especially when it's been through war." She sat across from him, fingers curled around the warm mug. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Henry met her eyes. "Because once someone helped me when they had no reason to. That kind of grace shouldn't die in one generation." Emma lowered her gaze, blinking slowly. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of silence. It wasn't being used against her. It was simply safe. Emma woke to the golden light of dawn peeking through the curtains. Birds chirped softly in the trees outside, and for the first time in a long time, she hadn't woken to raised voices or the cold ache of anxiety. She sat up slowly, stretching carefully as her baby kicked gently beneath her skin. In the kitchen, Henry was already making breakfast, scrambled eggs, fried plantains, and a pot of steaming tea on the stove. "Morning," he greeted, glancing up. "Hope you slept all right." She nodded, eyes still adjusting. "Better than I have in weeks." He handed her a plate, nodding toward the back door. "Come, let's eat on the porch." They sat side by side, not saying much, just watching the mist roll over the trees and letting the silence be enough. Henry didn't ask questions. He didn't prod. And that made it easier for Emma to eventually say, "His name is Thomas. He left me on the highway." Henry simply nodded, sipping his tea. His loss, big one. Later that day, Henry drove her to a local clinic so she could register her new address and continue her prenatal checkups. The nurses were kind, and the doctor, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Madhu, was calm and reassuring. "Your baby's strong," she said, smiling as the monitor picked up a rhythmic heartbeat. Emma stared at the screen, tears burning her eyes. This little heartbeat was her lifeline now. On their way home, Henry offered her a quiet smile. "I'm around if you ever want to scream, cry, or just sit in silence." Emma turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." Henry kept his eyes on the road. "Don't worry about thanks. Just heal. That's enough." That night, she walked into the guest room and placed her hand over her heart. This wasn't just shelter. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one written slowly, gently, without raised voices or slammed doors. For the first time, she was beginning to feel like more than just a woman someone abandoned. Over the next week, Henry began clearing out the storage room next to the guest bedroom. One afternoon, as Emma stepped out of the shower wrapped in a towel, she saw him on his knees, covered in dust and rearranging boxes. "What are you doing?" she asked, alarmed. He stood, brushing his jeans. "Thought I'd turn this into a little baby corner for you. It's got better light. I know you'll need a space soon." Emma blinked, stunned. No one had ever done something for her without asking for something in return. She walked over and knelt beside him, pressing a hand to her belly. "You don't have to do this, Henry." He looked at her gently. "I know, that's why I want to." Together, they began clearing the room. She folded old bedsheets. He brought down boxes from the attic. The air filled with laughter as Emma discovered a box of dusty toys. "Were these yours?" she asked. He chuckled. "Nah, I used to run a summer reading camp for kids in the neighborhood. Never had my own." There was a softness in his voice, almost like a shadow of longing. She noticed it, but said nothing. By the end of the week, the room had transformed. Henry painted the walls a soft cream, while Emma carefully arranged the crib a neighbor donated. She placed folded baby clothes into a drawer, pausing now and then to admire the little onesies. One morning, as she stood in the doorway admiring the room, she felt Henry behind her. "Looks good," he said. "Feels like a real home now." Emma nodded, her throat tightening. "I never thought I'd have a space like this. I thought I'd be giving birth alone in some shelter. Or worse." Henry's voice softened. "Life's strange. Sometimes the people who hurt us push us right into the arms of those who will help us heal." Emma turned toward him, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "Anytime." In the quiet that followed, the baby kicked again, and this time Emma smiled for real. Not for survival, but because something inside her was beginning to believe again. The clouds rolled in that Sunday morning, heavy and gray, casting a stillness over the house that felt different. Emma paced slowly around the living room, her hands pressed to the small of her back. Something in her body felt unfamiliar. Tugging, a pressure that came and went. She didn't want to alarm Henry, but when she leaned over the kitchen counter and exhaled deeply through a sudden wave of pain, he appeared almost instantly. "That's the third time in 20 minutes, he said, watching her closely. "Are you timing them?" She nodded, wincing. "They're closer now. I think it's happening." Without panic, Henry grabbed his car keys and a packed hospital bag she hadn't even known he prepared. "Let's go, Emma," he said, guiding her gently out the door. The ride to the hospital was quiet but filled with urgency. Henry kept glancing at her between red lights, his voice calm. "You've got this. I'll be there the whole time. Don't worry." By the time they arrived, the contractions were 5 minutes apart. Nurses wheeled Emma into a room, and the nurse on duty smiled warmly. "First baby?" she asked. Emma nodded, gripping the rail. Henry stood outside the curtain, giving her privacy but refusing to leave the building. Hours passed, screams, sweat, tears. But in the midst of that agony, Emma never felt alone. After 12 hours of labor, a shrill newborn cry pierced the air. She sobbed from relief, from wonder, from everything in between. "It's a boy," the nurse said, wrapping the baby in a soft blanket. Emma cradled her son, tears streaming as she whispered, "Noah, your name is Noah." Moments later, Henry stepped in cautiously. "Can I come in?" She looked up, hair damp, face radiant in exhaustion. "Meet your namesake," she said, smiling. Henry blinked, unsure. "What?" She extended the baby toward him. "Noah Henry Walker Lancaster, if that's all right." Henry's throat tightened. He reached out slowly, eyes glassy, and touched the baby's tiny hand. "It's more than all right," he whispered. "It's an honor." The days that followed felt like walking through soft sunlight. Emma and Noah were discharged and returned to Henry's home, where the baby corner now overflowed with soft blankets, bottles, and tiny baby books Henry had collected during their hospital stay. Emma walked through the house in the early mornings, cradling Noah, humming lullabies as dawn broke through the curtains. Henry, true to form, never hovered, but always made sure everything they needed was ready before she even asked. One afternoon, Emma found herself staring at him from the kitchen table while Noah napped in his bassinet. Henry was outside fixing a broken gutter, his shirt damp with sweat, his movements slower than usual. There was something off about his breathing, slightly labored, his steps more measured. She stepped out onto the porch. "You okay?" she asked, handing him a glass of water. He took it, smiling. "Just age catching up, that's all." She narrowed her eyes. "You're not that old." Henry chuckled. "Maybe not, but these bones have been through their fair share of wars." That night, Emma brought it up again. "You ever get checked? Your cough. It's not new." Henry stirred the pot on the stove, silent for a moment. "Been meaning to," he replied. "Just haven't had much reason to push it." Emma folded her arms. "Now you do." He looked at her then, eyes soft. "You're not responsible for me, Emma." She shook her head. "Maybe not, but you're family now. That's what family does." He sighed, a rare vulnerability flickering across his face. "I'll make the appointment." Emma nodded, stepping closer. "Good. Because you're not allowed to fall apart on me, Henry. Not now, not after all this." His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, quiet, sacred, unspoken. That night, while Emma rocked Noah to sleep, she glanced out the window and saw Henry standing in the yard, staring up at the stars. Hands in his pockets, shoulders a little lower than usual, as if trying to hold something in before the wind took it away. Henry had his doctor's visit 2 days later, brushing it off as just routine when he left. Emma stayed back with Noah, who had begun making the softest cooing sounds that made her chest ache with love. But as she tidied the hallway later that morning, she noticed something had fallen behind a small chest of drawers in the guest room. It was a worn envelope, unsealed, addressed in Henry's handwriting. Curiosity battled her conscience. She hesitated, but something told her this wasn't just another piece of paper. Carefully, she opened it. Her eyes scanned the words slowly, then widened as realization hit. It was a letter, not to her, but about her. A draft, maybe, or something he never intended her to read. It read. Emma sat down, hands trembling. The rest of the letter revealed what Henry had hidden. He had a terminal illness. Diagnosed 2 years ago. The treatments hadn't worked. He was simply waiting quietly, privately, for the end. He had planned to give his time, his kindness, and then fade out of her life quietly when it was time. The letter ended with, "She doesn't owe me anything. I've already received more than I ever gave. I just wanted her and that baby to know what peace looked like, at least once." Emma pressed the paper to her chest, sobbing silently. She couldn't confront him, not yet. She didn't know how. But everything made sense now, the way he looked at Noah, the moments he stared into nothing, the pain he never spoke of. She paced for hours, trying to compose herself. When Henry returned later that evening, she greeted him with dinner, smiled softly, and said nothing about the letter. But as they sat in the soft glow of the kitchen light, her eyes lingered on him longer. Her heart ached in a new, unbearable way. Not for herself, but for the man who had been carrying more than just her burdens, all while making sure she never felt the weight of his. In the days that followed, Emma watched Henry differently. Not with pity, but with the quiet reverence reserved for someone who was slowly folding into shadow. He remained kind, consistent, always present, changing diapers, making her laugh, reading Noah bedtime stories in his warm baritone. But Emma noticed the slight tremor in his hands when he poured tea, the way he leaned against the counter longer than necessary. One evening, as she stood behind him while he sliced vegetables, she said gently, "You don't have to pretend around me." He didn't turn. "Pretend what?" She moved closer, her voice steady. "That you're okay." Henry paused, then exhaled slowly. "I didn't want this time to be about me." She shook her head, tears pooling. "It's not. It never was. But I want to be there for you, the way you were for me." He finally turned, eyes tired but grateful. "You already are, Emma, more than you know." They fell into a rhythm that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Emma took on more around the house, often humming to Noah in the nursery while Henry rested quietly in the sunroom, pretending to nap but often lost in thought. One morning, she sat beside him with a photo album she had put together of their months together, Noah's first smile, Henry feeding him mashed banana, lazy Sunday mornings on the porch. "I want you to know something," she said. If this is all the family I ever have, it's enough. He didn't respond immediately. He just closed his eyes, and a single tear slid down the side of his face. That night, Henry wrote another letter, sealed this time, and placed it beneath the blanket in Noah's crib. He lingered beside the sleeping baby, pressing his hand gently over the boy's chest. "You saved your mama," he whispered. "And in a way, you saved me too." He didn't say goodbye out loud. But in the way he moved that night, slower, softer, more deliberate, Emma knew he was starting to prepare her for what he already accepted. It was just after sunrise when Emma stirred to the faint cry of Noah from the nursery. She stretched slowly, then noticed something odd: no clinking of cups, no kettle whistling, no creaking floorboards from Henry's usual morning routine. Her heart sank. She placed Noah gently in his crib after feeding him and padded across the house to Henry's room. The door was ajar. Sunlight spilled in through the window, casting soft light across the bed. Henry lay still, one arm curled gently by his side, the other resting on a closed leather photo album. Emma's breath hitched. She walked in, every part of her praying it was just deep sleep. But the stillness, the silence, it was different. She sat beside him and touched his hand. Cold, her breath escaped in a sob. "No, Henry," she whispered. "No, please." She pressed her head to his chest, but there was no sound, no warmth, only the soft scent of the cinnamon soap he always used and the finality of silence. She cried for hours, the pain too vast for words. When the paramedics came, she followed them in a daze, clutching Noah tightly. The small-town doctor confirmed what her heart already knew: Henry had passed peacefully in his sleep. "His heart likely gave out," the man said gently. "It's not uncommon, given his condition." Emma sat on the porch for hours that afternoon, staring at the place where Henry always fixed the wind chimes. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and quiet condolences, but she barely responded. That night, once Noah slept, she walked into Henry's room and lay on his bed. His scent was still there. On the nightstand, she found his journal, filled with thoughts about her and Noah, little sketches, lists of things he wanted to teach the baby one day. She pressed it to her chest, whispering, "Thank you for everything, for giving me a chance to live again." Then she wept until the pillow beneath her was soaked through. And even then, she didn't leave the room. It felt like leaving him behind. 3 days after the quiet burial under the eucalyptus tree near the back fence, a man in a pressed navy suit knocked gently on Emma's door. He introduced himself as Mr. Jacobs, Henry's longtime legal representative. "He asked me to come in person," the man said, offering her a small envelope and a file. Emma invited him in, her hands trembling as she opened the letter. Henry's handwriting filled the page, steady and full of grace. "If you're reading this, then you already know. I didn't want you to find out this way, but life doesn't always give us the timing we want. You gave me peace, Emma. You gave me a reason to smile every morning I had left. So everything I have, the house, the truck, my shares in Walker and Men's Tech, is yours and Noah's now. No strings, no catch. You were my family when I had none. Take it. Build something new. And know I loved you in the only way I knew how, by giving you what I never had. A home." Emma broke down again, her fingers clutching the letter like it was the last breath of air she had. Mr. Jacobs gave her space, then gently reviewed the will. Henry had left every single asset in her name, his business shares, savings, property. It was far more than Emma expected. He had been co-founder of a small but rapidly growing tech company, and his stake was substantial. He said he wanted Noah to grow up in a world built by kindness, Mr. Jacobs added, handing her a folder of legal documents. Emma stared at the papers, numb. What began as abandonment on a dusty highway had led her here, to the keys of a new life, written in the ink of Henry's quiet love. That evening, as she stood outside watching the wind chimes dance in the breeze, she whispered into the dusk, "I won't waste it, Henry. I swear I won't." She wasn't just mourning. She was being reborn, not into the life she wanted, but into the life someone else believed she deserved. Weeks after Henry's funeral, Emma found herself at the local town office signing papers that would legally transfer ownership of everything he left behind. The clerk, a kind, middle-aged woman with graying braids, offered her a soft smile. "You're lucky, dear," she said as she slid the final form across the counter. "Not because of the inheritance, but because someone thought so deeply of you. Emma nodded, her voice caught in her throat. The deed now bore her name, Emma Lancaster, but it felt like so much more than paperwork. It felt like a declaration that she mattered, that someone had looked at her and seen her as worthy of legacy. She clutched the documents and stepped out into the sunlight, squinting up at the sky. "We're going to make this place beautiful, Noah," she said to her son, who sat in his stroller gnawing on a teething toy. "For him, for us." That afternoon, Emma walked through the house slowly, touching every surface, tracing her fingers along the walls that had protected her, its rooms that had witnessed both her breaking and her rebuilding. In the corner of the living room, she unfolded a blueprint Henry had scribbled on one afternoon, a rough sketch of what could be: guest cabins, garden, central patio for bonfires. He had dreamed of turning the land into a retreat. Emma spread the sheet on the table and whispered, "Let's make it real." She started small, clearing out the backyard, hiring local help to fix broken fences, turning the sunroom into a cozy breakfast area. She painted the front porch in a warm shade of yellow. Every brushstroke felt like a conversation with Henry. One evening, as she sat rocking Noah in his crib, she looked around and smiled. "We're building something, sweetheart. Something good." And for the first time in her life, Emma didn't feel like she was surviving. She was creating. Emma poured herself into the renovations with focused energy. By the end of spring, the house had transformed into a warm and welcoming guest lodge. Walker's Rest, she named it, after the man who'd rescued her soul. Word spread quickly. Travelers, retreat seekers, and even new mothers looking for a peaceful weekend began booking rooms. Emma handled everything with grace, reservations, breakfast, late-night stories by the fire pit. Noah was always nearby, learning to walk on the same land that once saved them. The space was quiet yet full of life, just like Henry had envisioned. One guest, a journalist from a regional magazine, asked about the story behind the house. Emma smiled thoughtfully. "It started on a highway," she said, "but the road led me here." Moved by her tale, the journalist pitched a feature titled "The Highway Became Her Home." The piece went viral, reaching thousands of women who saw themselves in Emma's journey, from abandonment to strength, from despair to purpose. Letters began arriving. Women shared their own stories of betrayal, of quiet rebuilding, of choosing peace over pain. Emma read every word with tears in her eyes. One morning, she placed a hand over her heart and told Noah, "We're not just living anymore, we're helping others find their way back too." She started hosting quiet weekend writing workshops for women, giving them space to release their pain, to write their way into healing. Every chapter written inside her lodge felt like a shared miracle. Henry's memory lived in every room, every lantern, every morning cup of tea. And Emma, she was no longer just surviving a heartbreak, she was a soft force of restoration. It was a bright Saturday morning, the air warm with the scent of lemon blossoms from the front grove. Emma was setting out folded linens on the porch when she noticed a figure standing hesitantly by the front gate. Her breath caught. The man looked thinner than she remembered, his shoulders slumped, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes shadowed with shame. It was Thomas. His presence felt like a cold breeze pushing into her warm sanctuary. He didn't speak at first, only stared at the woman she'd become. Her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her skin glowing, her posture tall and unshaken. Beside her, Noah toddled toward the steps, squealing with delight. Thomas swallowed hard. "Emma, can we talk?" Emma didn't move. Her eyes narrowed slightly, protective. "About what?" she asked flatly. He shuffled forward, stopping at the threshold of the gate as if he sensed the boundary. I saw the article. I didn't know all this. I didn't know you'd—" She raised her hand to stop him. "You didn't care to know. You left me 8 months pregnant on a highway. That tells me everything I need to know about what I was worth to you." Thomas dropped his gaze. "I was wrong. I was lost." Emma's voice stayed firm. "And now that I've built something, you're suddenly found?" He said nothing. She stepped forward, picking up Noah in her arms. "You're looking at everything I became after you left. And there's no space in this story for what you abandoned." The gate remained closed between them. She turned without waiting for a reply and walked back toward the house. Noah clung to her shoulder, and the sound of the wind chimes whispered through the stillness. Behind her, Thomas remained frozen, realizing too late that the woman before him had already said her final goodbye. After Thomas's unexpected visit, Emma sat on the porch long after sunset, arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the wind stir through the trees. The conversation lingered in her bones like old pain returning with new weight. She stared into the night, asking herself if she'd done the right thing. But deep inside, she knew what Thomas carried wasn't remorse. It was regret rooted in self-interest. He didn't return for her healing. He returned for her harvest. Later that night, Gloria, one of her weekend guests, approached hesitantly. "I couldn't help but notice that man," she said gently, sitting beside her. Emma gave a small nod. "He used to be my husband." Gloria blinked, surprised. "Used to be?" Emma exhaled. "Until he left me on the highway. Pregnant." There was a long silence. Then Gloria reached for her hand. "And now look at you. The road didn't end there. It started here." The next morning, Emma gathered herself. There was a full booking ahead, and she refused to let the past pollute the haven she'd created. As she walked through the garden pruning hibiscus shrubs, Noah giggled nearby, chasing a butterfly with 2 toddlers from a visiting couple. Life moved forward because she chose to. Thomas never returned, but she caught word from town that his business had collapsed, and he was staying in a motel, barely scraping by. Emma felt no satisfaction in it, only closure. "Let him figure out what peace costs," she murmured as she locked the front gate for good that night. Later, she picked up a journal and began writing again. Not about pain this time, but about resilience. "We don't always get to choose how people leave us," she wrote, "but we get to choose who we become when they do." And in that moment, Emma smiled, not the smile of survival, but of sovereignty. Word spread quickly about Walker's Rest, not just as a lodge, but as a sanctuary. Locals began affectionately calling Emma Ma, a title she didn't seek, but came to accept with humility. Women stopped by not just to rent rooms, but to sit on her porch, sip her ginger tea, and cry through things they'd held in for years. One night, a young woman named Sage showed up at the gate barefoot and shaking, a bruise swelling above her eyebrow. Emma took her in without questions, led her to the guest room, and sat with her until she fell asleep. The next morning, Sade looked at her and whispered, "I haven't felt safe in years." "Not until now." Emma touched her hand. "You're safe here. No one will ask you to shrink to fit into pain again." More women came, some for a weekend, some for a month. A few even asked if they could help around the property just to stay close to the peace. Emma established a routine, morning meditation in the garden, late breakfast on the porch, quiet writing hours, evening group conversations by firelight. She never asked them to open up, but they always did. And somehow, they always said the same thing: "You helped me remember who I was." Emma never claimed to be a therapist. She was simply a woman who had once been broken, who had been picked up from the side of the road, not with pity, but with dignity. One afternoon, as she hung laundry under the sun, a woman named Bimpy said, "You don't know this, but you saved my life." Emma glanced at her gently. "Then Henry saved us both. I'm just continuing what he started." It was true. She wasn't building just a business. She was nurturing a quiet revolution where healing wasn't loud, but it was lasting. One evening, after Noah had drifted to sleep, Emma sat at her desk in the corner of the sunroom, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. She flipped through her old journals, reading pieces of her pain and triumph, then paused when she saw the line Henry had once underlined in his notebook. She wasn't just saved, she was reborn. Her fingers lingered there. Slowly, steadily, she began typing, no longer from wounds, but from wisdom. The book she never meant to write began to take form. She titled it "The Highway Became My Home." Chapter by chapter, she detailed the storms, the silence, the stranger who gave her a second chance, and the peace she built from ashes. Each word was a salve, each sentence a seed. By the time she finished the final chapter, it was midnight. She stared at the blinking cursor for a long while before typing the last line. And if you ever find yourself abandoned by love, remember, love might still be waiting around the next corner, wearing an old jacket and a gentle smile. She closed her laptop and wept quietly, not from sadness, but from the release that came with telling her story on her own terms. The manuscript was published months later through a small independent press, but it traveled far and wide. Readers from all over the world wrote in, thanking her for her vulnerability, for reminding them that healing wasn't loud or grand, but deeply, stubbornly human. Emma didn't write the book to be known. She wrote it so someone somewhere could feel less alone. And in doing so, she felt more whole than she ever imagined. One afternoon, Emma walked into a bookstore in a nearby town, Noah perched on her hip and giggling at the rows of brightly colored covers. She hadn't planned to stop. She just needed a quiet break while running errands. But there, in the front display, under a banner that read Voices of Strength, stood her book. The Highway Became My Home sat front and center, its soft cream cover and sunflower design unmistakable. Emma froze, her heart thudding. A woman nearby picked up a copy, flipping through the pages. "I've read this twice," she said to the cashier. "I cried both times. I think every woman should read it." The cashier nodded. "It's our best-selling memoir this month. Can you believe the author lives just an hour from here?" Emma turned slightly, not ready to speak. It wasn't vanity that rooted her there. It was disbelief. She never imagined her quiet pain would echo this far. Later, at home, she sat on the porch, while Noah napped and thought about the strange paradox of it all. Her darkest night, the one on the highway, had unknowingly birthed a new identity. People now wrote her letters, sent gifts, even asked to interview her. She accepted some, declined others. What mattered most to her was that the story belonged to every woman who ever felt discarded. Gloria approached one evening during dinner. "You've become a symbol," she said gently. Emma shook her head. "I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be a reminder that silence doesn't have to be permanent." Gloria smiled. "You're both." That night, Emma wrote in her journal, "I was never meant to be famous. I was meant to be free. But if my freedom helps others find theirs, then let the pages keep turning." And with that, she laid her pen down and looked out at the sunset, soft orange folding into deep blue, grateful that her voice had found light after being buried so long in the dark. Noah turned 2 in the middle of summer. The lodge was full of guests that weekend, but Emma paused everything for a quiet celebration. She dressed Noah in a little white linen shirt and khaki shorts, and he waddled through the garden laughing, his curls bouncing with every step. She baked a small cake with mango frosting, just the way Henry had once suggested they might celebrate baby milestones, with something tropical. Around the backyard, paper lanterns floated gently in the breeze, and a few close friends, Gloria, Sade, and Bimpy, joined the intimate gathering. Emma lit the candle and knelt beside her son. "Ready, baby?" Noah clapped. She smiled through the lump in her throat. "Make a wish, even if you don't know what that means yet." As the candle blew out, the women around her cheered softly, but Emma's heart whispered silently, "I wish Henry could have seen this moment." Later that evening, after the guests had left and Noah was tucked into bed, Emma pulled out a dusty leather box she hadn't opened in months. Inside were Henry's journals, photos, and the tiny blanket he'd first wrapped Noah in. She sat on the floor, unfolding the pieces one by one. She whispered stories to the empty room. Of the night Noah was born, of Henry's silly dance moves in the kitchen, of his coughs he tried to hide. "You would have been so proud of him," she said, voice cracking. "He has your patience, your stillness." She pulled Noah's baby photo from beneath the stack and placed it beside a younger picture of Henry. The resemblance was uncanny, the eyes especially. She placed both pictures into a wooden frame and set it on the nightstand. That night, as she drifted to sleep, the stars outside glittered a little brighter, as if the man they honored was smiling down on the boy who now carried his name, not just in full, but in spirit. Autumn brought crisp winds and golden leaves to the lodge, but it also brought an unexpected letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Emma opened it with mild curiosity until she saw Thomas's handwriting. The letter was short and unsteady, as if written with trembling hands. "Emma, I know I have no right, but I'm asking anyway. I'm not well, my health has declined, and I've been thinking about my son. I'd like to see him, please, even just once." Emma sat still for a long time, rereading the words. There was no anger in her expression, just a quiet resolve. She stood, folded the letter neatly, and placed it in the kitchen drawer. That evening, as she watered the plants, She replayed the plea in her mind. Noah was her joy, her light, but he didn't need confusion. He didn't need half-love built on guilt. Gloria noticed her mood and asked gently, "Something wrong?" Emma shrugged. "A ghost came knocking, but I don't open doors to the dead anymore." Gloria nodded in understanding. "You don't owe your peace to anyone's past," Emma exhaled. "Exactly." The next day she wrote back, not with cruelty, but with clarity. "Thomas, Noah is happy, safe, whole. That is more than enough. I wish you peace, but from a distance." She sealed the letter and dropped it in the mailbox without a second thought. The gate remained locked. The past could knock, cry, or plead, but it would never be allowed to sit at her table again. Emma had learned something precious. That closure isn't always an open door. It's often the strength to walk away and never return. Late one afternoon, while Emma was setting up for an evening poetry session under the large oak tree behind the lodge, a woman arrived unannounced. She wore a flowing red shawl over a faded blouse, her face weathered by time and burden. She clutched a notebook to her chest as though it held her final breath. Emma met her by the gate. "Can I help you?" she asked gently. The woman nodded, her voice barely audible. "I read your book. I took the last bus to get here. I don't need a room. I just need a place to sit and not be afraid." Emma opened the gate without hesitation. "Then you've come to the right place." The woman's name was Amaka. She had been hiding for years, first in marriage, then in shame. That evening she sat under the tree with a group of women, notebook unopened, but eyes wide, watching as others shared their pain and found strength in every line. Over the next few days, Amaka became a quiet presence at Walker's Rest. She didn't speak much, but she wrote pages and pages, sometimes crying as she did. Emma would pass her tea and sit beside her in silence. One night, Amaka approached her. "Do you ever feel guilty for moving on?" Emma looked at her, heart stirred. "I used to. Then I realized guilt is just grief with no direction. I started choosing joy, not because the pain vanished, but because I refused to drown in it." Amaka nodded, blinking fast. "Do you think healing is possible for women like us?" Emma smiled. "I don't just think it. I see it every day in this place, in you." When Amaka boarded the bus a week later, she hugged Emma tightly and whispered, "Thank you for giving me permission to breathe again." Emma stood by the roadside watching the bus fade into the distance, heart full. These were the moments Henry's legacy lived, in the women who found their way back to themselves, one sunrise at a time. Early one morning, Emma was tending the herb beds near the back fence when she noticed a piece of paper nestled beneath the rosemary bush. At first, she assumed it had blown in from the road. But as she picked it up, she realized it was carefully folded, sealed with a small blue sticker in the shape of a star. Curiosity tugged at her fingers. She opened it slowly and began to read. "Dear Miss Emma, I don't know if you remember me, but my name is Caleb Walker. I'm Henry's nephew. I only recently learned of his passing, and even more recently of you. I want to visit Walker's Rest, not to disturb you, but to understand the man my family let slip away. Henry was always the mystery, the exile. But something tells me you knew the real him. I'd like to meet the woman he trusted with everything." Emma sat down on the garden bench, wind rustling softly around her. A nephew. She hadn't known Henry had any living relatives. He had told her he had no one. But maybe the story had more roots than he ever let show. That evening, she reread the letter in the quiet of her room. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't invasive. It felt sincere. She wrote back simply, "Dear Caleb, Walker's Rest is always open for those who seek peace, not noise. You are welcome, but come with your heart, not your questions." She sent it through the return address on the envelope and whispered aloud, "Let's see what you're really looking for." That night, as the wind chimes danced and Noah stirred softly in his crib, Emma felt a strange anticipation, not fear, not excitement, just the trembling edge of possibility. When Caleb arrived a week later, Emma immediately saw it, the resemblance. The same thoughtful eyes, the same quiet humility in how he stepped onto the porch and removed his cap. He looked around slowly, as if inhaling memories he never got to make. "This place," he said, "feels like him." Emma offered a hand. "He built it without a hammer. Just kindness." Caleb smiled faintly. He always had that, even when the family didn't understand it. Over tea, they sat in the sunroom and Emma told him stories. not of Henry's death, but of his life. Of how he tucked Noah into bed, of how he never raised his voice, of how he saw beauty in small things. Caleb listened, eyes glassy, whispering, "I wish I'd known him like this." Later, Emma took him to the tree where Henry was buried. It wasn't a grand headstone, just a wooden plaque carved with the words, "Here rests peace." Caleb stood silently, one hand resting on the trunk. "He left us," Caleb said quietly. "Or maybe we left him first." Emma didn't reply. She simply placed a flower at the base of the tree and stood beside him. That evening, Caleb stayed for dinner, laughing gently as Noah clambered across his legs. "He's got Henry's spirit," he murmured. Emma nodded. "And he's being raised in the light Henry gave us." Before bed, Caleb turned to her and said, "Thank you for giving him back to us, if only through memory." Emma smiled softly. Memories don't die. They root deeper when shared. And just like that, a branch of Henry's past was grafted gently into her present, not to disrupt, but to remember. That night, as the sun sank below the distant hills, Caleb stepped onto the porch and stood beside Emma, both watching the lanterns flicker around the garden. There was something hesitant in his expression, a question resting behind his lips. "I've been thinking," he began slowly. "I came here to meet Henry through you, but I didn't expect to feel home." Emma turned to him, brows lifted slightly. "Home?" He nodded. "I've spent years trying to belong somewhere. Maybe I kept running because I didn't think I deserved to. But being here, it's like Henry left space for me too." She studied him for a long moment, then said softly, "Walker's Rest was never meant to be mine alone. It belongs to anyone who comes with the right spirit." Caleb looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Would it be crazy if I asked to stay? Help out? Learn more?" Emma leaned against the railing, the night breeze dancing through her hair. "Only if you know this place won't be a hiding spot. It will show you who you are. Sometimes painfully." Caleb smiled, that same humble smile Henry used to give her. "Then maybe I'm ready for that." She paused, then gave a gentle nod. "All right, we'll find you a room. But I don't serve breakfast in bed." They both laughed, and the sound blended into the rustling trees. Inside, Noah stirred in his sleep, and the wind chimes rang as if offering their blessing. Emma didn't know what this new chapter meant yet, whether Caleb's presence would reshape the rhythm of their days, but she felt no fear. Only quiet acceptance. Henry's roots were still growing, reaching further than she imagined. And perhaps, she thought, healing didn't end. It only changed its face. Over the next several weeks, Caleb became an integral part of the lodge's rhythm. He rose early to sweep the garden paths, helped maintain the wooden fence around the orchard, and fixed the old shed behind the main house that Emma had once considered tearing down. One morning, as they reviewed old sketches in Henry's journal, Caleb looked up and said, he really wanted to add cabins here. Emma nodded, remembering the conversations. He said peace should have room to grow. They studied the land together, and by late autumn, the foundation for the first cabin was laid. Local volunteers, many of whom were former guests, joined in, contributing labor, supplies, and stories. The air was filled with laughter, hammer strikes, and the scent of roasted yams Emma served every lunch break. One evening, after the final nail was driven into the first completed cabin, they all gathered beneath the tree that stood near Henry's resting place. A fire crackled at the center, casting shadows on smiling faces. Emma stood with Noah in her arms as Caleb raised a mug and spoke. To the man who didn't just build a place, but planted a purpose. A cheer rippled through the group, glasses clinking, joy humming in the air. Emma stepped forward. And to the people who kept it growing. You didn't just help build a cabin, you helped build belonging. That night, as she watched the lights glow from inside the finished cabin, Emma felt a contentment deeper than peace. This was community. This was Henry's dream, not just carried out, but multiplied. And in every brick, every beam, every footstep on the new wooden floor, his legacy pulsed like a heartbeat. The following spring, Emma received an invitation she never expected. A national women's conference wanted her to speak, not just as an author, the letter said, but as a voice that turned pain into purpose. She sat with the letter for a long time, heart-pounding. The idea of standing before hundreds, sharing the most fragile pieces of her life, felt terrifying. She shared it with Caleb over breakfast, her hands shaking. What if I'm not what they think? She asked. Caleb stirred his tea thoughtfully. Emma, you didn't build this life by pretending. You built it by being real. That's all they need. She hesitated, staring at the envelope again. I never wanted attention, just peace. Caleb smiled, then let peace speak. It has your voice now. The day of the conference arrived like a tide. Emma stood backstage, her palms damp, the lights dim beyond the curtain. She held a copy of her book and wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, no embellishments, just truth. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage to soft applause. She paused at the podium, closed her eyes for a moment, and then began. I was left on the side of a highway, she said. Not just by a man, but by a life that no longer had room for me. And yet a stranger chose to stop. And in that simple act, everything changed. The hall was silent, breath held in collective awe. Emma spoke not as a survivor, but as a witness to grace, to growth, to what can bloom after abandonment. When she finished, the applause rose like a wave. Later, a young woman approached her, eyes shining. You gave me permission to forgive myself, she whispered. Emma smiled, held her hand, and said, Then that means everything I lost was never really wasted. Weeks after the conference, Emma sat at her desk reading through the flood of emails that had followed her speech. Messages from women across the country, some from as far as Ghana and the UK. But tucked between a congratulatory note and a podcast invitation was one that stopped her breath. A name she had deleted from her life, but not her memory. Thomas Lancaster. The subject line read, I watched your speech. I'm sorry. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message was short. Emma, I saw what you've done. What you've become. I don't expect forgiveness, but I had to say it. I was wrong. I see it now. I know it's too late, but I needed you to hear that I regret everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you. She sat back in silence, a strange calm settling in her chest. The anger she once carried had long since crumbled. What remained was distance, clean, clear, and unshakable. Caleb found her staring out the window later that evening. You all right? He asked. She handed him her phone. He wrote again. Caleb read it slowly, then handed it back. What are you going to do? Emma turned toward the setting sun and said, Nothing. Let the silence speak this time. There were no doors left for Thomas to knock on. No wounds left for him to press. Some apologies don't need answers. They just need endings. Emma's days returned to rhythm. Brunches with visitors, barefoot walks through the orchard with Noah, storytelling sessions under the tree. Caleb had fully settled in, now managing the growing retreat program while helping coordinate workshops that brought women from across the country. Laughter rang through the lodge walls again, deep and unforced. Emma often paused in hallways or porches, stunned by the sound, because it was hers. Her own laughter, once a stranger to her, now a familiar echo. One afternoon, as she and Caleb prepared lemon tea for the guests, she looked at him with a playful smile. You never expected to stay this long, did you? He grinned. I thought I came for Henry. It turns out I came for everything else. She chuckled, stirring honey into the pot. And I thought I came here to hide. But this house kept drawing me into the light. Noah rushed in then, covered in dirt, holding a squashed flower. Mama, I made this for you. She scooped him up, kissed his cheek, and said, It's perfect, like everything we've grown here. That night, a small jazz band from town played on the porch, while guests danced beneath string lights. Emma stood back, hand resting on her chest, watching the flicker of joy move through the space. Her journey had begun in silence, isolation, and betrayal, but now it was wrapped in warmth. Not perfect, not without its scars, but deeply, entirely hers. She had become the woman she once wished would come rescue her, and in doing so had rescued herself. On the second anniversary of Walker's Rest, Emma held a celebration beneath the stars. Friends, guests, and women who had once arrived broken now stood tall, laughing, healed in parts they once thought were gone forever. A photo of Henry rested beside the fire pit, draped in flowers. Emma took the microphone and said, We're not here because of tragedy. We're here because of grace. One act of kindness changed my life, and every one of you has kept that kindness alive. Applause filled the night air, followed by cheers. As guests danced and music played, a quiet knock came at the front gate. One of the volunteers hurried to Emma. There's a man asking for you. Emma stepped away from the celebration and found Thomas standing at the gate, thinner, grayer, holding a small box. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said softly. "I just wanted to leave this." He handed her the box. Inside was a faded baby rattle and a picture from their first ultrasound. "That's all I have left. I wanted you to have it." Emma looked down, her heart steady. "You chose absence, Thomas. You don't get to return now that the storm has passed." He nodded slowly, eyes glossy. "I just needed to see what peace looked like." Emma closed the box, then the gate. "This peace was built without you, and it will never need you to stay standing." She turned, walked back toward the firelight, and didn't look back. The gate clicked shut behind her, soft, final, and free. Noah ran into her arms, and she lifted him high. The music played on. Emma danced. Not for show, but because the pain no longer choreographed her steps. The last chapter had ended, not with bitterness, but with power. And she was ready for the next story. One she would write on her own terms, with joy in her chest and no apology in her stride. Here's the Bible verse for the story. Isaiah 61 verse 3, "To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." This verse reflects Emma's transformation from abandonment and despair on a highway to strength, healing, and purpose rooted in grace. It speaks to how God can turn suffering into beauty, and how what is planted in pain can still bloom in glory. Moral of the story: you are not defined by who walked away, but by what you chose to become afterward. Emma's journey teaches that even the deepest betrayal can become the soil for renewal. True healing begins not when the past apologizes, but when you step forward without waiting. Love, when given freely and without conditions, can restore more than just comfort. It can give someone back their name, their strength, and their life. And sometimes the stranger who stops to help isn't just an interruption in your story. They may be the beginning of your rebirth. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.